Next up on the Pioneer History Channel, we will examine the events that brought a major rise to the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement that took place during the 1950s and 60s as a whole was devised of many smaller movements that combined into a large civil rights movement that is recognized today. However, four major events that created a revolution of African American rights were the Montgomery bus boycott, the North Carolina Greensboro sit-ins, the Birmingham campaign, and the March on Washington. All of these led to the prohibition of the discriminatory policies across the United States. One of the first major events that helped change the rights for African Americans was the Montgomery bus boycott, occurring from December 5, 1955 to December 20, 1956. The boycott was prompted after Rosa Parks, a seamstress at the Montgomery department store, was on her way home and would not give her bus seat up for a white male. The incident prompted thousands of African Americans to avoid using the Montgomery bus system until full ethnic integration. Many prominent leaders were brought to the nation's spotlight during this bus boycott, but one in particular was Dr. Martin Luther King. As a great orator, he gave many speeches concerning the boycott. In his speech starting on the first day of the boycott, he said,
"Friends, we are certainly very happy to see each of you out this evening. We are here this evening for serious business. We are here in a general sense because first and foremost, we are American citizens. And we are determined to acquire our citizenship to the fullness of its meaning."
The Montgomery bus boycott didn't just make buses desegregated, but it also serves as a stepping stone for a revolution of African American rights in the country, allowing for many court cases like this and leaders such as Dr. Martin Luther King to make an impact within the country. On February 1st, 1961, Ethel Blair, David Richmond, Franklin McCain, and Joseph McNeil went to the local Woolworth lunch counter and were refused service. The four, however, did not leave and remained sitting in their seats until closing time that evening. The following day, the college students returned with 300 classmates. As a whole, these protests remained nonviolent. Diane Nash, a protester in attendance, recalls how they trained for these sit-ins. Quote, "We would practice not striking back if someone struck us," end quote. One of the most important parts of the sit-in were their nonviolent stance. The Greensboro sit-ins brought the civil rights movement to the forefront of the American society. In Rebecca Cowell's Staging the Greensboro Sit-ins, she states, "Many attribute the Greensboro sit-ins with the transformation of the movement from a local, or more southern-based, to a national campaign for the equal rights of Americans of color." End quote. The Greensboro sit-ins led to the large-scale movement that we are now familiar with. The Birmingham campaign was one of the most influential civil rights movements in the entire movement. Nicknamed Project C, they planned lunch counter sit-ins, marches to City Hall, and boycotting local stores with policies of segregation. The head of Birmingham Police, who was a strong opponent to integration, ordered arrests of those involved, including Dr. King. While in jail, Dr. King wrote a letter, and in it he wrote for his call of unity, and his letter helped secure it. The Birmingham campaign saw large national recognition of the civil rights movement. In Alden Morris's The Birmingham Confrontation, he highlights how the media finally took attention to the movement. Quote, "When Dr. Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference led the local black population in an economic boycott, sit-ins, demonstrations, and ultimately into jail, the nation and other parts of the world finally took notice. After the campaign, the movement called for a march on Washington to make a final push for social equality." On the date of August 28, 1963, 250,000 marchers arrived in Washington, D.C. to encourage the Civil Rights Act that was currently stalled in Congress to pass. The march was a combination of efforts of Dr. King and Philip Randolph. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference and Randolph's followers descended on the National Mall in droves. Dr. King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. The March on Washington was the pinnacle of the movement, and less than a year after the Civil Rights Bill was passed. As legal discrimination was finally put to an end, the large civil rights movement was put to rest. However, still today as a country, we have sex-based, race-based, religion-based, age-based, and many other forms of discrimination, showing that despite the immense sacrifices made by the aforementioned individuals, as a people, there is still a need for improvement in our society.